Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. It's quite rare to see true innovation in the nonprofit museum space. And when it does happen, it's exactly the kind of thing we want to explore on the podcast. And at a time when museums are struggling with funding, perhaps more than ever, the idea that an institution could generate additional revenue in a creative way, it's a genuinely riveting opportunity. So in this week's episode of the podcast, we're joined by Adam Levine, the director and CEO of the Toledo Museum of Art. Under Adam's leadership, Toledo has taken a highly unconventional and forward-thinking step by selectively guaranteeing artworks at auction, both to strengthen its permanent collection and to generate revenue for the museum. You see, for those unfamiliar with how guarantees work, when you guarantee a work at auction and end up losing, you typically earn a fee from the auction house for effectively pre-buying the artwork, which removes risk from the seller and the auction house. It's a strategy that museums almost never use, which makes Toledo's decision especially notable. In our conversation, we talk about Adam's background, how this strategy emerged at Toledo, what it took to bring the board along, how it's played out in practice, and what it could mean for other museums looking for new models going forward. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Adam, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Adam. Thrilled to be on.
Absolutely. Well, I remember reading a few months ago about you and the Toledo Museum and how you're selectively utilizing auction guarantees to either acquire artworks for the collection or when you lose at auction, you're generating revenue for the museum. I thought it was really innovative. And to be honest, I don't see that much innovation coming from the nonprofit museum space. So I'm really excited to have you on and learn more about you and everything you're doing at the museum. So it is, as I said, quite rare for museums to engage in guarantees at auction. And to be honest, even to be deeply familiar with them and how they work. To start off, can you tell us a little bit about your path to the Toledo Museum of Art and how your experience in the art world shaped the way you think about the art market and institutional collecting?
Yeah, sure. So I studied art history as an undergraduate, got my master's and my PhD in art history as well. Began my museum career at the Met in the Greek and Roman department, went to Toledo, et cetera, right? That's like the art layer. And then sort of woven within that thread in a way that is like totally nonlinear, were a bunch of other sort of maybe more market-oriented activities. So I worked at Sotheby's as an intern, shared between several departments, and then sort of continued on and doing a little bit of consulting with the African and Oceanic department, specialist department. So Greek and Roman antiquities, the pre-Columbian department, and African Oceanic, all of which for old Sotheby's alums were sort of on the same floor in the York Avenue building. I then worked in the business intelligence department when it was being spun up by Bruno, who then went on to be the CEO of Bonhams. So there was a time when if you double-clicked on business intelligence in Outlook email, you would only see two people in the department. So that was sort of early on for me. It's much more sophisticated now. And then I also spent some time in investment banking, at Citigroup. So that has all sort of conditioned the way that I think, about sort of markets and structured products and structured finance. And a lot of that emerges out of my other sort of academic interest, which was, applied math. So, my undergraduate degree was from Dartmouth and it was called mathematics and social sciences. So it's sort of an applied math degree with a quantitative social science. So that's like, I bring all that to the way that I think about museums. I think, museums have always engaged with the market. We engage with the market regularly. To the extent people believe museums should acquire, that's engaging with the market. To the extent people believe museums should deaccession, that's engaging with the market. And we've thought long and hard in Toledo about the tools that are available to us to allow us to compete more effectively in the market and to support our mission-driven work, which is to integrate art into people's lives. So that's, the background that has led me to sort of think about how the market and museums intersect, and to maybe be open to different tools than museums have traditionally used.
Yeah, you have a really diverse background with a lot of exposure to the art market, which I don't think is that common for museum directors. But knowing that, it makes a lot of sense how guarantees became part of the equation in Toledo's acquisition strategy. Can you walk us through how the idea of selectively guaranteeing works at auction actually emerged at Toledo and what it took to bring colleagues, the board, any patrons along with you in terms of the concept and buying in and the potential risk or reward of engaging in guarantees?
Of course, yeah. So I think there's another part to the story about, how these things all came together. So picking up the thread on guarantees specifically, because there are other instruments, right, that can be used, right, and that we use. But picking up on guarantees specifically. So actually, maybe to answer one thing first, there are other museum directors with finance experience, right? Tim Rubb at the Getty, right? Spent time in investment banking. There are others besides, and a bunch of museum directors have MBAs, right? And, I think there are people who wonder about, how corporate museums should or shouldn't be. But, as I've said on the record before, best business practice is different than corporate culture, right? Our museums must run effectively for them to do their mission-driven work, right? So it shouldn't be one or the other. It should be both mission-driven work, run well. And certainly everyone is aware that there are financial pressures on the nonprofit model. So finding revenue diversification and augmentation is super important. So now to guarantee specifically. So I actually created a company, in 2008, that developed an algorithm for pricing our auction guarantees. That was actually the core intellectual property. And then we built sort of like a suite of analytical and quantitative tools around it. The company was called Art Research Technologies. We provided white label content to the Wall Street Journal, to Sotheby's, specifically magazine, to Art and Auction magazine. Sotheby's used to have that publication where they would do some sort of market analytics. So, we built a team. We had an office in Dogpatch Ventures down in Soho. I was an awful CEO, like truly terrible, so metabolized like every lesson learned, but the IP had some value. And this was 2008. It was at the moment where auction houses had started moving into the space. There were some defaults as a consequence of the financial sort of crisis, the Great Recession, and auction houses thought, well, this is a good tool, but we got to get this risk off our balance sheet. So we thought there could be a market for pricing them. And then, of course, the algorithm could have been has been tweaked for fair market values and other things besides. So terrible CEO, we sell the IP, but having been in that deal flow, right, it was pretty obvious to me that there was a lane for museums to play. So I sort of kept that with me, and in fact published an article in the Journal of Museum Management and Curatorship on auction guarantees as a risk optimal acquisition strategy for museums. I think it came out in 2013. I wrote it in 2012. And yeah, no one did anything about it for more than a decade. So this has been an idea that's been sort of percolating for a while. And I think that the concern I feel like some people have voiced misunderstands the purpose of the tool. And the purpose of the tool is, I think, explicit in that article that I wrote. This is not about speculation. This is not even about money. And this is the key governance point. This is about being compensated if we don't get what we want. So people ask, how did you bring the board along? It was not hard. So we have the benefit of having an incredible board, and that is a hallmark of Toledo, right? I think anyone who's ever been a director in Toledo would tell you how unbelievable the board here is generationally. Just a really, really strong governance culture and a really healthy line between governance and management. This was not a difficult conversation because the optionality was very clear to them. The only thing that really matters is, can you validate that the guarantee price is a price that you would pay on the private market? And is this something that you really want for your collection that aligns with your collecting strategy? If those two things are true, then there is no reason not to guarantee at the price. And sometimes you'll hear someone say, well, if you do end up with the object, haven't you by definition overpaid? And the answer is, let's see in 5 years. Right on the day, maybe, but it would be very difficult for you to point to something in the Toledo Museum of Art collection which is not worth more in inflation adjusted terms than it was at the point of acquisition. So it is our research that we have to undertake. The art committee must be convinced we have done our comparative analysis effectively and we have come up with a value, or we have come to terms on a guarantee that reflects a fair market value or lower for the work. But yes, the only thing the guarantee does is it allows us to get a return when we do not get the object. And for the avoidance of doubt, we have purchased objects using guarantees. We have also made millions of dollars using guarantees. So it was not hard to get the board on board.
Yeah, it's really incredible that you wrote about this idea so many years ago, and it ultimately took you becoming a museum director to bring it into practice. So can you share with us a little bit more about how the guarantee strategy has played out so far, and what have you learned from this process?
Yeah, and I guess maybe to go a little bit off piste, right, and offer a provocation for the field as a whole, right? So I think the point about the article, right, is that what is the readership of the Journal of Museum Management and Curatorship, and does it overline with management and curatorship, or with people who study management and curatorship, which is not a critique of the journal, but it is an opportunity, I think, for the field to think about how we train managers. We have, the Center for Curatorial Leadership, right? We have the Getty Leadership Institute. We have sort of crash courses. I think if you were to look at the Trends Watch that's going to come out in PDF format in just a couple weeks, it's going to highlight this growing gap, right? This growing gap of, leaders today and sort of leaders of the future. It's hard to recruit leaders for these organizations. I think there's a real opportunity for us to take management as a discipline within this sector, museum specifically, a little bit more seriously. So moving, to how it's worked for us. So we are in conversations regularly. I am literally in a conversation right now about a potential guarantee. We're not going to pursue it because we're focused on reinstalling our collection for the first time in 40 years. And, so we have an acquisition moratorium. But we are in really interesting deal flow. And that is also a competitive advantage, I should say, because we see more and we see more, across value spectrum, across collecting area, because our collection spans all of human history. So I do feel like it gives us also insight into where the market is in ways that help us, even if a guarantee doesn't work, sort of understand what fair market is in other areas. So even the things that don't come to terms and we don't underwrite are still value add for the organization as a whole. I can't disclose specifics about anything, but other than to say we have underwritten several guarantees, fewer than 10. And each and every one has been a success because we have either gotten a superlative artwork for our collection or we have acquired an object. And it is not, I don't think you could sort of read about the Toledo Museum of Art's acquisitions and intuit which ones we purchased by guarantee or not. It's a whole range of things. Our acquisitions by guarantee, have spread, hundreds of years and thousands of miles.
You mentioned that the museum has actually made money from these guarantees, right, in the cases where you didn't end up as the winning bidder, especially in a climate where museums are facing funding challenges, whether for operations or acquisitions. How impactful has it been to have these additional funds available through a pipeline that's so atypical and unexpected?
Yeah, so it's a diversifier for us, and I'm happy to get as into the nitty-gritty on this as you would like, but we do not budget for guarantee revenue, which is the other side of the governance coin, right? If this is literally about being compensated on the upside for or the downside if you're the acquirer, right? But if it exceeds the guarantee price, then and you hope you get the artwork, then you hope you don't get any return. I mean, I can't, it actually, like, the emotional valence here is important too. Like, we are upset when we get compensated because it means we've lost the object, right? Like that is actually how the curators feel. That is actually how I feel. Um, so, so we do not budget guarantee revenue, which means in any operating year, when we get it, it's windfall revenue. And what's so important about that, I think, in our model, and I can't speak for all museums or all nonprofits, but I do think that this is probably generally the case. Um, it is really helpful to have risk capital that was unbudgeted because inevitably there are things that come up in any given year. And rather than having to take from one bucket to put in another, it's helpful to be able to say, wow, like that teammate and that educator had an incredible idea for a program. Like, let's go do that. And actually, frequently, it's those ideas that then connect us with a new donor or connect us with a new funding stream and allow the whole operation to grow more sustainably. Um, and I can give you a specific example of that if you would like, but yeah. So we had we have a new incredible director of marketing. And we have this, I think, kind of unicorn program called our Block Party that was introduced by my predecessor, Brian Kennedy, and has really sort of grown into this incredible community celebration every year in the fall now at the Toledo Museum of Art. And this year, our Block Party aligned with an exhibition, the most significant exhibition to date on generative art in this country, Infinite Images, the Art of Algorithms. So Despy Mays, our director of communication, had this idea to have a drone show and to actually have the drone show depict some of the works that were in the collection. And that drone show cost, $55,000, and that was unbudgeted because she came in sort of new. But we were able to, because we had some proceeds, invest in that drone show. And then lo and behold, we received a $55,000 donation in Bitcoin, to, support, the drone show after the fact. And now we have established sort of that price point for future drone show support. So now we have, if we want to avail ourselves of it, an opportunity to continue doing this thing that the community loved, and, fundraise against it from, in this instance, sort of a different donor. And it only would have been made possible by, unfortunately, not getting something that we wanted to acquire.
So, do you think this approach of embracing auction guarantees can realistically be adopted by other museums, or does it only work under very specific conditions? And have other institutions reached out to you to pick your brain about this since Toledo began doing it?
Yeah, some of my colleagues have reached out. I think there's a lot of curiosity. And can't say that I can't say that no museum hasn't done it, right? Before or after. I don't know. Um, I think the way to think about this is it's a tool. And because it's a tool, you may never make any money on it and only get artwork. You may make a lot of money on it and never get an artwork. It will be lumpy, so it should be treated as such. But I would expect that there will be more institutions that will give it a try. But at most, it will only be a revenue diversifier. And the impact it makes is a function of the size of your art funds, the purpose of your art funds, because that is what allows you to write larger guarantees and potentially get larger returns. And is obviously also a function of your operating budget. So Toledo is in a position where we have significant acquisition funds, endowed acquisition funds relative to many of our peers, and we're a mid-sized museum. So I think those two things put us in a position where it could be sort of most impactful for us. But this is as a revenue strategy. I would not advise it as a way to try and sustainably grow an organization. As a really good strategy for acquiring a work of art that could have some positive benefit, it's hard for me to see a counter argument.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think about guarantees, I usually think about them from the perspective of collectors or dealers or even speculators, since those are the typical profiles of guarantors. From my own experience working at an auction house, the advice I often give to people who are considering guaranteeing works is not to get into the guarantee game purely to make money, because you are more than likely going to end up owning some works that you didn't actually want to buy. But if a work genuinely resonates with you and it's something you want in your collection, it can make sense to guarantee it. Because in the scenario where you don't win the work, you've at least made some money in the process. So what's interesting and different about Toledo is that you're a museum, and these works, of course, are ones that you truly want. And if you win them, they'll enter the collection for the long term or even in perpetuity. And the museum will care for them and be a good home for them. It's just interesting that we now have a new type of participant in the guarantee space.
And I have to say, like the key point there is it must be something you want, right? That's the table stakes that makes the whole model work. And I do have to say, I think, my sense, right? Because of course we are not dealing with the consignor directly. But my sense is that, uh, sometimes the consignor, in knowing that the guarantor is an institutional partner, I think that could encourage, something that might not come to market to come to market, right? It could also encourage someone to accept a guarantee where they might not have accepted a guarantee otherwise. So I also think that, this could be not just good for museums it is good for museums as a tool. There is potential upside, but I also think that as a tool, it could also unlock marginal opportunities for collection building, and bringing more artwork into the public domain, is not a bad thing either.
And before we let you go, I want to ask you a little bit more about the Toledo Museum of Art. I imagine some of our listeners have heard of it, maybe some haven't. Hopefully a few have visited in the past, but tell us a little bit more about the history of the institution. What type of works does the museum collect in its permanent collection? Maybe tell us a little bit about some current exhibitions or upcoming exhibitions that you're excited about.
Yeah, so look, I mean, the Toledo Museum of Art is one of the great museums in the world. It is just mind-blowingly great. And the easiest way to describe it to people is to say, there's no way I can describe it to you, because however much I hype it up, if you've never been, then you still won't believe what you see when you come. It's a 37-acre campus. We're the first art museum in the United States with buildings by two Pritzker Prize winners. Frank Gehry's building was commissioned in 1988. Finished in 1992 when all was said and done. We have Sana's first building in the United States. So opened in 2006, commissioned in 2000. And that's in addition to a 250,000 square foot Beaux-Arts building, which is, I think, one of the great ones in this country as well. I'm not from Toledo, right? I say this all the time. There's no hometown bias here. This is the zeal of the convert. I'm a born and raised New Yorker. I still have my 646 area code, right? So like anyone who can't believe how great Toledo is, I'm telling you, it is absolutely mind blowing. And the thing that distinguishes the collection is from its not quite its founding, but shortly thereafter, one of the founders of the museum, Edward Drummond Libby, sort of threw down the gauntlet when the Beaux-Arts building was first opened in 1912. And he said, we will focus only on artworks of the highest quality, regardless of geography, regardless of chronology. So the collection is comprehensive. I don't say encyclopedic because in addition to all the problems that inhere in that word, it's also never been the mandate here. But the idea is global quality, sort of exceptionalism from every culture, which is a really beautiful idea because, as long as you don't fetishize other aesthetics, as long as you don't use a Eurocentric, right, or any sort of lens, right, but you're actually taking a relativist approach to the aesthetics. There is an aesthetics of every culture, right? There are great works everywhere and seeing quality, not as, sort of this, tightly confined canon, but as this expansive and democratic concept is really incredibly beautiful. So I began my career at the Met and the Greek and Roman department, as I said, one of the 18 departments, hundreds of thousands of objects, right? The Toledo Museum of Art collecting since 1901 has only about 25,000 objects, but everything that you would experience is as good as anywhere else. That it is this exceptional place. And we've been talking about guarantees, right? Yes, maybe that's something I brought to the Toledo Museum of Art, but I'm very happy to say that the Toledo Museum of Art is exceptional because of the 120 years of history before I ever showed up. So it's a privilege to be able to steward this place, into the 21st century. And if your listeners need to come and visit, there's nothing I can do to prepare them for how excited they would be. Although I would advise you wait until our reinstallation is done in 2027 so that you're not walking through, phased construction.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a really incredible place. I'd love to visit, and I'm sure our listeners would as well. Adam, thanks so much again for coming on the podcast and sharing more details about how you're selectively utilizing auction guarantees to acquire some artworks for the Toledo Museum of Art, as well as generating some additional revenue for the museum. If our listeners want to learn more about the museum, what's the website they can visit? Where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, ToledoMuseum.org is the website, and you can find all of our socials by just searching for Toledo Museum.
Perfect. Thanks again, Adam. Speak soon.
Of course. Thanks, Adam.